He laughed at her for working as a waitress until she bought the company he worked for. Hannah grew up in a modest neighborhood, the kind where neighbors knew each other's names, and life was defined by simple pleasures and hard-earned lessons. Her parents worked tirelessly, her mother as a schoolteacher and her father as a mechanic, to provide a stable life for their family. But despite their efforts, financial struggles were a constant shadow over their household. Hannah was an ambitious child, curious about the world beyond her small town. She dreamed of attending college, getting a degree, and building a life that was different from the paycheck-to-paycheck reality she knew. Yet life had its own plans. Just as she was about to start college, her father fell seriously ill. Medical bills piled up, and Hannah made the difficult choice to drop out and support her family, setting aside her dreams without complaint. Working as a waitress at a local diner wasn't part of her original plan, but it paid the bills. The job was demanding, long hours on her feet, dealing with difficult customers, and the constant struggle to make ends meet with meager tips. Despite the daily grind, Hannah found pride in her work. She treated every customer with kindness, finding solace in the small connections she made over cups of coffee and plates of pancakes. She never considered herself less than anyone else because of her job, but she couldn't ignore how others often looked down on her, as if her worth was tied to her uniform and the notepad she carried. Hannah had always been resilient, and even during the hardest times, she held on to an unwavering belief that her circumstances didn't define her. She saved every extra dollar, refusing to let her situation dim the spark of ambition inside her. In quiet moments after long shifts, she'd jot down business ideas in a worn notebook, thoughts about starting her own company someday, creating something that would give her the freedom and security her family never had. Though those dreams felt distant, they were the fuel that kept her moving forward, one small step at a time. The diner's fluorescent lights and greasy air became the backdrop of her formative years. She watched as classmates from high school moved on, posting about their college lives and new careers, while she balanced trays and counted tips. It wasn't jealousy she felt, more like a quiet ache, a reminder of what she'd sacrificed. But Hannah never allowed herself to wallow. She believed life wasn't a straight path, and while hers had taken unexpected turns, she was determined to find her way back to her dreams, no matter how long it took. Her mother often reminded her, "Hannah, the value of a person isn't measured by titles or paychecks. It's measured by how they carry themselves when no one's watching." That advice stayed with her, becoming a silent mantra through both the struggles and small victories. Hannah wasn't just surviving, she was quietly preparing for something greater, even if she didn't realize it yet. One rainy afternoon, after a double shift left her exhausted and craving nothing but sleep, Hannah found an envelope tucked into her mailbox. It was elegantly designed, with gold-embossed lettering that read, "You're invited, class of 2010 high school reunion." She stared at it for a moment, debating whether to toss it in the trash or tuck it away and forget about it. The thought of facing people who had moved on to impressive careers, while she was still serving coffee and burgers, felt like an invitation to humiliation. But curiosity gnawed at her. What had become of those classmates she once knew? The thought lingered for days, as persistent as the envelope sitting on her kitchen counter. Hannah wasn't someone who cared much for appearances, but the idea of walking into that reunion wearing the label of waitress unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. She could already hear the unspoken judgments, the polite but condescending questions about what she'd been doing since high school. Despite the doubts, something inside her refused to let fear win. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe a quiet defiance. She decided to go, not to impress anyone, but to prove to herself that her worth wasn't defined by anyone's opinion. She didn't buy a new outfit for the occasion. Instead, She wore a simple dress she had for years, pairing it with a confidence she'd earned through years of hard work and perseverance. As she stood in front of the mirror before leaving, she reminded herself, "I'm more than my job. I'm more than their opinions." Still, as she made her way to the reunion venue, her heart raced with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The venue was lavish, a stark contrast to the simplicity of Hannah's daily life. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and the room buzzed with laughter and small talk. She walked in quietly, unnoticed at first, and scanned the crowd of familiar faces, now polished by time and success. Conversations swirled around promotions, graduate degrees, exotic vacations, and new ventures. Hannah felt like an outsider stepping into a world that had moved on without her. It didn't take long before someone recognized her. "Hannah? Wow, it's been years," an old classmate named Jessica greeted her with feigned enthusiasm. The questions came quickly, wrapped in sugary tones. "What have you been up to? Where do you work?" Each inquiry felt like a spotlight, exposing her perceived shortcomings. She answered honestly, mentioning her job at the diner, watching as polite smiles masked thinly veiled judgment. Then came Liam, the golden boy from high school, now dressed in an expensive suit, exuding arrogance with every step. He'd been the type to measure people's worth by popularity and achievements, and it seemed nothing had changed. Spotting Hannah, he sauntered over with a smug grin. "Hannah? Still waiting tables, huh? Guess life's been simple for you." His words dripped with condescension, and laughter from a small group nearby followed, like an unwelcome chorus. For a brief moment, humiliation washed over her. But then, something shifted. Hannah met Liam's gaze, her expression calm, almost amused. She didn't respond with anger or defensiveness. Instead, she offered a polite smile, masking the flicker of satisfaction that came from knowing something Liam didn't, that she was far more than the waitress he saw. She carried that silent truth like armor, choosing grace over retaliation, knowing that life had a way of revealing its own ironies in due time. Driving home from the reunion, Hannah replayed the night in her mind. The echoes of laughter, the dismissive glances, Liam's smug remarks, they all lingered like background noise. But beneath it all, there was an unexpected sense of peace. She realized that their judgments didn't sting as much as she'd feared. They didn't know her story. They didn't know about the business she'd quietly built from scratch, the late nights spent researching, planning, and working towards something bigger. In fact, her side hustle had been growing steadily. She'd started a small online retail business a few years back, using skills she taught herself after long shifts at the diner. What began as a modest venture had turned into a profitable operation, one she managed with meticulous care. While others flaunted titles and job promotions, Hannah had been building an empire in silence, with no need for validation from anyone. The next morning, as she sipped her coffee and reviewed her company's financial reports, she chuckled softly to herself. Liam had no idea that the woman he mocked owned a business that was on the brink of acquiring the very corporation he worked for. It wasn't revenge she craved, it was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that true success doesn't need an audience. Years earlier, when Hannah first started her business, it was nothing more than an idea scribbled in the margins of her notebook during slow hours at the diner. She noticed a gap in the market for eco-friendly home products, simple, sustainable items that people could use in their daily lives. With a small loan and the little savings she'd managed to put aside, she launched an online store from her tiny apartment, packing orders by hand and learning as she went. The beginning was rough. She faced setbacks, made mistakes, and often questioned if she was in over her head. But every failure taught her something new, and every small victory fueled her determination. She worked tirelessly, balancing her waitress job during the day and running her business at night. While others slept, she strategized, researched, and refined her approach. Her efforts paid off. The business grew steadily, attracting loyal customers and catching the attention of investors. Partnerships followed, and soon her modest startup evolved into a recognized brand. Hannah never sought recognition. She was content watching her company thrive from behind the scenes. Success, she realized, wasn't about status or titles, it was about resilience, grit, and the courage to believe in yourself when no one else does. Hannah's business continued to grow, surpassing milestones she once thought were out of reach. She had gone from fulfilling orders in her cramped apartment to managing a small team in a modest office space downtown. Her products had gained a loyal following, and with each passing year, profits soared. She reinvested every dollar she could back into the business, expanding her product lines, improving marketing strategies, and establishing key partnerships. But it was a merger opportunity with a major corporation that would change everything. This wasn't just any company, it was a global conglomerate with a diversified portfolio, one that unknowingly employed Liam as part of its mid-level management team. Hannah's company was thriving, but this acquisition would catapult her into an entirely new league, giving her influence and control she'd never imagined. Negotiations for the merger were long and complex, filled with board meetings, legal consultations, and late-night calls. Despite the challenges, Hannah navigated every detail with precision. She never revealed her identity directly to the larger corporation during the initial phases. Everything went through her executive team and legal representatives. This anonymity gave her a quiet advantage, allowing her to observe without interference. When the deal was finalized, she became the majority shareholder, effectively acquiring controlling interest in the company. It wasn't until the ink had dried on the contracts that Hannah realized the full irony of her success. Liam, the man who had belittled her, was now an employee at a company she owned. The revelation wasn't just satisfying, it was poetic. For a moment, Hannah considered staying in the shadows, managing the company from behind the scenes like she had always done. But something inside her shifted. She realized this wasn't just about business anymore, it was about showing herself, not for revenge but for closure. She wanted Liam, and everyone like him who had underestimated her, to see the person she had become. She wasn't the waitress he'd mocked at the reunion. She was the CEO of the company he depended on for his livelihood. This wasn't about petty triumph, it was about reclaiming her narrative, proving to herself that she had always been enough, even when others couldn't see it. The official announcement of the acquisition was scheduled for a Monday morning, during the company's quarterly town hall meeting. It was a grand event, hosted in the corporation's sleek, glass-walled headquarters, attended by hundreds of employees, including executives, department heads, and middle managers, Liam among them. The air buzzed with anticipation, as rumors had already spread about a major leadership change. No one knew exactly who the new owner was, only that the company's future was about to shift dramatically. Liam, oblivious to the truth, strutted through the office with his usual arrogance, confidently speculating with colleagues about the potential new leadership. He joked loudly, "I hope it's not some clueless investor who doesn't know how to run a business." Meanwhile, Hannah sat quietly in a private conference room, reviewing her notes. Dressed in a tailored suit that reflected her understated confidence, she felt no nervousness, only a calm sense of purpose. Her executive assistant gave her a nod, signaling that it was time. She walked down the polished hallways, her heels clicking softly against the marble floors, each step echoing with the weight of years of hard work and resilience. As she entered the grand auditorium, the crowd hushed. The CEO they had all been speculating about was finally here. No one recognized her at first, not even Liam, who sat near the front, scrolling absently through his phone. The host introduced her with formal words. "Please welcome our new majority shareholder and CEO, Ms. Hannah Cole." The room erupted in polite applause, but as Hannah took the stage and the spotlight fell on her, gasps rippled through the audience. Liam's head snapped up, his smug expression freezing into one of disbelief. His jaw slackened slightly, eyes widening as recognition dawned. The woman he had mocked, the waitress he'd ridiculed at the reunion, was now standing before him as his boss. Hannah paused, letting the silence stretch just enough to let the weight of the moment sink in. She smiled, not out of spite, but with the quiet grace of someone who had nothing left to prove. The days leading up to the town hall were filled with meticulous planning. Hannah had met with the board of directors, outlined her vision for the company's future, and finalized the agenda for her first public address as CEO. Despite her calm exterior, she spent hours reflecting on how she wanted to present herself. This wasn't about rubbing her success in anyone's face, it was about authenticity. She didn't want to become the kind of leader who thrived on power or ego. Instead, she wanted to inspire, to show that success was possible regardless of where you started. Her story wasn't just a personal victory, it was a testament to resilience and self-belief. She thought about her family, her mother's sacrifices, her father's unwavering support during his illness, and the countless nights she'd spent balancing work and entrepreneurship. Every struggle, every sleepless night, had led to this moment. On the morning of the announcement, she stood by her office window, watching the city awaken beneath the rising sun. She wasn't nervous. Instead, she felt a deep sense of peace, as if all the scattered pieces of her life had finally come together. Dressed in a simple yet elegant navy suit, she didn't need flashy symbols of wealth to validate her worth. Her confidence came from within, rooted in years of perseverance. When the time came to leave for the corporate headquarters, Hannah walked through the doors of her office with quiet determination. She arrived at the building unnoticed at first, blending in with the flow of employees. As she passed through the lobby, she caught glimpses of familiar faces, people she'd never met but whose livelihoods were now intertwined with her decisions. And then she saw him, Liam, standing near the elevators, laughing with a group of colleagues. He didn't notice her. Not yet. But soon, he would. The thought didn't fill her with satisfaction, just a quiet, undeniable truth: life had a remarkable way of coming full circle. As Hannah navigated the corridors of the company she now owned, she observed the daily routines of employees bustling with purpose. Some carried coffee cups, others engaged in quick conversations about deadlines and meetings. It was surreal to think that all of this was under her leadership now, though most people didn't recognize her yet. She passed Liam in the hallway just moments before the town hall. He was surrounded by a small group of coworkers, laughing loudly, his confidence unshaken by the impending changes. He glanced at her briefly, his gaze sliding over her without recognition, dismissing her as just another corporate face. There was an ironic satisfaction in that fleeting moment, how easily people overlook those they deem insignificant. Hannah didn't pause or make her presence known. Instead, she continued walking, her expression composed. The contrast between their realities couldn't have been starker. While Liam basked in his own self-importance, unaware of the shifting tides, Hannah carried the quiet power of knowing exactly who she was and who he was to her. She entered the executive conference room where her leadership team was waiting. They greeted her with the respect due to a CEO, their professionalism sharp and unwavering. They had no idea about the personal history she carried with one of their mid-level managers, and Hannah preferred to keep it that way. This wasn't about personal vendettas. It was about leadership and vision. Moments later, she found herself standing backstage, waiting for her introduction. The muffled sounds of employees filling the auditorium reached her ears, a sea of people, all curious about the new figurehead. She took a deep breath, not out of anxiety but out of acknowledgement. This was it. The culmination of years of struggle, growth, and perseverance distilled into one pivotal moment. As her name was announced, she stepped into the light, ready to claim her space, not just as a woman who had been underestimated, but as the leader who had earned every bit of her success. The auditorium buzzed with hushed whispers and curious glances as Hannah approached the podium. She could feel the weight of countless eyes on her, yet her composure remained unshaken. The polished wooden stage, the gleaming lights, and the vast expanse of suited professionals seated before her, it all felt surreal, but also deeply right. She scanned the crowd briefly, her gaze landing on Liam, whose expression was frozen somewhere between confusion and disbelief. His posture had shifted, his usual confident slouch replaced by stiff, upright attention. The smug grin he often wore had vanished, replaced by a strained attempt to mask his growing discomfort. Hannah began her speech, her voice steady and warm. She spoke of vision, resilience, and the importance of adaptability in an ever-changing business landscape. Her words weren't rehearsed platitudes, they carried the authenticity of someone who had lived through the lessons she now shared. She talked about the value of hard work, of integrity, and the importance of never underestimating the potential hidden behind humble beginnings. As she spoke, she noticed subtle shifts in the room, people leaning forward, drawn in by the sincerity of her message. Even those who had been skeptical about the leadership change seemed captivated. Liam's face was a study in suppressed panic. The realization had fully dawned on him now, evident in the way his jaw clenched, his eyes darting occasionally toward his colleagues as if searching for some shared acknowledgement of the uncomfortable truth. But no one seemed to notice his distress. They were all focused on Hannah, the woman he had dismissed, who now stood at the helm of the company that determined his professional fate. Hannah didn't single him out, didn't need to. The moment itself was enough, a silent, undeniable shift in power that required no additional commentary. She ended her speech with a simple, heartfelt sentiment: success isn't measured by where you start, but by how you rise. The room erupted in applause, but the only sound Hannah truly heard was the quiet unraveling of Liam's pride. As the applause faded, the energy in the room shifted from polite admiration to genuine intrigue. Employees exchanged glances, clearly impressed by the poised and eloquent woman now leading their company. Hannah's words had resonated on a deeper level, not just as corporate rhetoric but as a reflection of real experience and leadership born from resilience. Liam, however, sat rigid in his chair, his expression betraying the inner turmoil he could no longer mask. His face had paled slightly, his confident demeanor unraveling as he processed the stark reality: the woman he'd mocked at the reunion was now his ultimate superior. While Hannah remained composed, her heart carried the silent acknowledgement of this full-circle moment. She didn't need to call Liam out publicly, his own realization was far more powerful than any words she could say. Still, the temptation lingered. She glanced briefly in his direction, their eyes locking for a fraction of a second. That fleeting connection held the weight of years of assumption shattered, of underestimation laid bare. Hannah's slight, knowing smile was all it took, a subtle gesture that spoke volumes. Liam's face flushed, his bravado crumbling as he shifted uncomfortably, suddenly small in a room where he once held court with arrogance. After the meeting adjourned, employees gathered in small groups, discussing the announcement and speculating about the company's future. Liam lingered near the back, clearly unsettled, his usual charisma replaced by awkward silence. Hannah exited the stage gracefully, her presence leaving a ripple of admiration in her wake. As she walked through the crowd, colleagues parted respectfully, offering congratulatory remarks. She responded warmly but didn't pause until she reached the exit, where Liam stood frozen in place, as if rooted by the weight of his own humiliation. Without missing a beat, Hannah offered a polite nod, her eyes steady and calm. "Good to see you again, Liam," she said softly before walking away, leaving him speechless amidst the echoes of his own past arrogance. In the days following the announcement, Liam found himself grappling with an identity crisis he never anticipated. His once unshakable confidence was now riddled with self-doubt, each interaction with colleagues a painful reminder of the hierarchy shift he couldn't ignore. People spoke about Hannah with admiration, praising her leadership style, her vision, and the authenticity she brought to the company. Liam overheard these conversations everywhere, in the break room, in meetings, even in casual hallway chats. Each word felt like a subtle jab, a reminder of his mistake in underestimating someone whose capabilities far exceeded his narrow perceptions. Meanwhile, Hannah settled into her role with the quiet authority she'd cultivated over years of hard work. She attended department meetings, not just as an overseer but as an engaged leader, asking thoughtful questions and offering insights that surprised even the most seasoned executives. Her leadership style was different from what the company had known, less about titles and more about collaboration, respect, and genuine interest in people's ideas. Employees responded positively, inspired by her approachable demeanor and clear vision. She never mentioned Liam publicly, never weaponized her authority to belittle him, even though the opportunity was there. That, perhaps, was the most humbling part for Liam, realizing that Hannah's strength wasn't just in her success, but in her grace. One afternoon, Liam found himself alone in the elevator with Hannah. The air was thick with unspoken tension. He cleared his throat awkwardly, trying to muster the courage to speak. "Hannah," he began, his voice softer than usual, stripped of its usual bravado. I owe you an apology." Hannah turned to him, her expression calm but unreadable. She didn't rush to fill the silence, allowing his words to hang in the air. After a moment, she replied simply, "We all learn our lessons, Liam. Some just take longer than others." The elevator doors opened, and she stepped out, leaving Liam standing alone, haunted by the echo of his own arrogance and the quiet dignity of the woman he once underestimated. Liam's days became a series of small reckonings. The office, once a place where he felt invincible, now felt like a maze of reminders about his misplaced arrogance. Every meeting, every project, every casual interaction carried an invisible thread connecting back to that pivotal moment when Hannah claimed her rightful place at the top. He found himself avoiding eye contact with colleagues, especially those who had witnessed his earlier bravado at the reunion. The humiliation wasn't just external, it had seeped into his very sense of self, challenging the narrative he'd built around his own competence and importance. While Liam wrestled with his discomfort, Hannah thrived. She implemented changes within the company, fostering a culture of respect, transparency, and innovation. Employees felt heard and valued, which translated into increased productivity and morale. She wasn't just the new CEO, she was a catalyst for transformation. Her leadership wasn't performative, it was rooted in authenticity and a genuine desire to uplift others. Despite her success, she remained grounded, never using her position to exact revenge or settle scores. That restraint spoke louder than any public humiliation could have, highlighting the stark contrast between who she was and who Liam had assumed her to be. Eventually, Liam could no longer ignore the need to confront his past. He scheduled a one-on-one meeting with Hannah, not out of obligation, but from a genuine desire to acknowledge his mistakes. As he sat across from her in the sleek, glass-walled office that symbolized everything he'd once aspired to, he felt the full weight of his previous ignorance. "I've been reflecting a lot," he admitted, his voice steady but sincere. "I realize now how wrong I was about you, about what success really means. I'm sorry for the way I treated you." Hannah listened without interrupting, her expression softening slightly. After a pause, she responded, "Apologies are easy, Liam. Growth is harder. What matters isn't what you say now, it's what you choose to do moving forward." Her words weren't harsh, they were honest, leaving Liam with a new understanding of accountability, one that extended beyond words. After the meeting, Liam sat at his desk, staring blankly at his computer screen. The usual hum of office activity faded into the background as he replayed Hannah's words in his mind. For the first time in years, he questioned the foundation of his self-worth. He'd built his identity on shallow markers of success, job titles, salary, social status, but none of those things had prepared him for the humbling realization that true leadership wasn't about power or prestige. It was about character. Hannah's quiet strength had dismantled his ego more effectively than any public confrontation could have. Meanwhile, Hannah found herself reflecting as well. Despite the satisfaction of professional success, she often thought about the journey that had led her here. The countless nights spent working late, the rejections, the moments of doubt, all of it had shaped her into the leader she'd become. She realized that Liam's condescension at the reunion had been just one of many obstacles she'd faced, but it wasn't the defining one. What defined her was how she'd responded, not with bitterness, but with perseverance and grace. Her success wasn't about proving anyone wrong, it was about proving to herself that she was capable, resilient, and worthy. One evening, as she walked through the now familiar halls of the corporate headquarters, Hannah paused by a large window overlooking the city skyline. The lights below twinkled like distant stars, each one a reminder of how far she'd come. She thought about her younger self, the girl who'd worked double shifts at the diner, who'd felt invisible at times, struggling to believe in her own potential. She wished she could go back and tell that girl, "Keep going. It's all worth it." In that quiet moment, she realized that success wasn't a destination. It was a journey, a series of choices, lessons, and moments of growth that shaped not just careers, but character. And for Hannah, that was the ultimate triumph. Hannah's influence on the company became more evident with each passing month. She wasn't content with maintaining the status quo. She wanted to create a culture where every employee felt valued and heard. She introduced open-door policies, encouraged collaborative brainstorming sessions, and prioritized mental health initiatives. Under her leadership, employee engagement skyrocketed, and the company's performance metrics reflected the positive shift. But more than the numbers, it was the atmosphere that changed. Meetings that once felt rigid and hierarchical now buzzed with genuine enthusiasm and creative energy. Employees who had once felt overlooked found their voices amplified, their ideas welcomed and celebrated. Hannah's leadership wasn't about micromanaging, it was about empowering others to take ownership of their work. She led by example, demonstrating that success didn't require arrogance or dominance. Instead, it thrived on empathy, authenticity, and a commitment to continuous growth. She met regularly with teams across all levels, not just to review performance, but to listen, really listen, to the challenges and aspirations of the people who made the company run. Her approach wasn't revolutionary in theory, but in practice, it transformed the company's culture from the inside out. Liam observed these changes with a mixture of awe and discomfort. He couldn't deny the impact Hannah had made, nor could he ignore how different her leadership style was from the one he'd once aspired to emulate. Her success forced him to reevaluate his own approach, not just at work, but in life. Slowly, he began to shed the performative confidence he'd clung to for so long. He started listening more, asking questions without pretense, and genuinely engaging with his colleagues. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but it was real. For the first time in his career, Liam understood that leadership wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It was about creating space for others to be heard. Weeks passed since their brief conversation in the elevator, but Liam couldn't shake the lingering weight of unfinished business. Despite his apology, he felt there was more to address, more to understand about how his arrogance had not only belittled Hannah but stunted his own growth. Summoning the courage he hadn't known he possessed, Liam requested a one-on-one meeting with Hannah. She agreed without hesitation, her professionalism unwavering. As he stepped into her sleek, minimalist office, the contrast between who they had been in high school and who they were now was undeniable. Gone was the smugness from Liam's face, replaced by vulnerability he could no longer mask. The meeting began with polite formalities, but the air was thick with unspoken truths. Liam cleared his throat, his eyes meeting Hannah's with genuine remorse. "I've been thinking a lot about our past," he started, his voice steady but softer than usual. "I realize now that I judged you based on my own insecurities. I measured success by superficial standards, titles, appearances, status. But seeing you here, leading with such grace and strength, has made me question everything I thought I knew about success." Hannah listened intently, her expression unreadable. After a brief pause, she leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharp yet kind. "Liam, growth isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning from it. The real question isn't whether you regret your actions, it's whether you'll let them change you." Liam nodded, the weight of her words settling over him. This wasn't the closure he had expected, but it was the one he needed. Their conversation continued, shifting from personal reflections to professional aspirations. By the end, Liam felt lighter, not because he had been forgiven, but because he had been challenged to be better. As he left her office, he realized that true growth isn't marked by grand gestures or dramatic apologies. It's found in the quiet moments of self-reflection and the willingness to face one's flaws head-on. And in that realization, Liam took his first genuine step toward becoming the person he had always pretended to be. Hannah's influence within the company extended far beyond boardroom decisions and quarterly reports. Her leadership philosophy, rooted in authenticity, empathy, and resilience, began to ripple through the organization, subtly reshaping the culture. Employees who once felt invisible under the previous management's rigid hierarchy now found their voices amplified. Departments that had operated in silos started collaborating more organically, inspired by Hannah's emphasis on shared success over individual accolades. Her approach wasn't revolutionary in theory, but in practice, it was transformative. People felt seen, heard, and, most importantly, valued not just for their output, but for their potential. Liam wasn't immune to these changes. As he observed the shifts happening around him, he felt both inspired and uncomfortable. The discomfort wasn't rooted in resentment but in self-awareness. For years, he had operated under the assumption that leadership was about control, about asserting dominance and projecting confidence. But Hannah's quiet strength challenged that narrative. She didn't lead with an iron fist or inflated ego. Instead, she led with purpose, vulnerability, and an unwavering belief in the people around her. Watching her, Liam realized how much he had to unlearn, not just as a manager, but as a person. Determined to change, Liam began to approach his work differently. He started listening more, asking thoughtful questions, and genuinely engaging with his team. He sought feedback, not as a formality, but as a tool for growth. Slowly, his colleagues noticed the shift. Conversations became more authentic, collaborations more meaningful. He wasn't just mimicking Hannah's leadership style, he was internalizing its core principles, adapting them in a way that felt genuine to him. The transformation wasn't immediate, nor was it flawless. But it was real. And as Liam grew, so did the people around him. In that way, Hannah's influence wasn't just top-down, it was contagious, inspiring change at every level of the organization. As the company flourished under Hannah's leadership, her vision extended beyond profit margins and market shares. She wanted to build more than just a successful business, she wanted to create a legacy. For Hannah, that meant fostering an environment where people didn't just clock in for a paycheck but felt genuinely connected to their work and their colleagues. She launched mentorship programs, pairing seasoned employees with newer team members to cultivate growth and knowledge sharing. She prioritized diversity and inclusion, not as corporate buzzwords, but as core values embedded in every hiring decision and company policy. Hannah also introduced wellness initiatives, understanding that productivity wasn't solely tied to hours worked but to the well-being of the people behind the desks. Mental health days, flexible work arrangements, and creative outlets became standard practices, not perks. The company's culture shifted from one of silent competition to one of mutual support. Employees no longer felt like cogs in a machine, they felt like integral parts of a living, breathing organism that valued their unique contributions. Outside the office, Hannah's impact grew as well. She became a sought-after speaker at industry conferences, not because she sought the spotlight, but because her story resonated with so many. Her journey, from waitress to CEO, wasn't just inspiring, it was a testament to the power of resilience, hard work, and the courage to defy expectations. Yet, despite the accolades and recognition, Hannah remained grounded. She never forgot where she came from or the lessons learned along the way. Her legacy wasn't defined by her title or achievements, it was etched in the lives she touched, the barriers she broke, and the culture of compassion and excellence she cultivated. That, more than anything, was her greatest accomplishment. Surprisingly, as time passed, an unexpected friendship began to form between Hannah and Liam. It wasn't the kind born from shared interests or effortless camaraderie, but one forged in the fires of growth, humility, and mutual respect. Their conversations evolved from polite professional exchanges to candid discussions about leadership, mistakes, and personal development. Liam, having shed much of his former arrogance, often sought Hannah's insights, not out of obligation, but genuine admiration for her wisdom. And Hannah, recognizing his sincere efforts to change, responded with openness she hadn't anticipated. Their dynamic was marked by a refreshing honesty. Liam never pretended to have all the answers, and Hannah never held his past mistakes over his head. Instead, they found common ground in their shared commitment to growth, not just for themselves, but for the people they led. They challenged each other, offering constructive criticism without ego or defensiveness. What began as an unlikely connection slowly transformed into a partnership rooted in trust, vulnerability, and the recognition that even the most flawed individuals are capable of profound change. One evening, after a long day of meetings, they found themselves sitting in the nearly empty office lounge, sipping coffee and reflecting on their journeys. Liam chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You know, if someone had told me 5 years ago that I'd be here, learning from you, I would have laughed in their face." Hannah smiled, her gaze thoughtful. "Life has a funny way of humbling us," she replied. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of their shared history lingering between them, not as a burden, but as a testament to how far they'd both come. In that quiet space, surrounded by the soft hum of office lights, their friendship felt like a small, unexpected gift, a reminder that sometimes, the people who challenge us the most are the ones who help us grow the most. Years later, another high school reunion was announced. This time, Hannah received the invitation with a different sense of anticipation. She wasn't the woman who had nervously debated attending, worried about judgment and comparisons. She was now a leader, a mentor, and someone who had carved out her own path on her terms. There was no lingering desire to prove anything to anyone. Her success spoke for itself. Yet, she decided to attend, not out of obligation, but from a place of closure and curiosity. Arriving at the event, Hannah walked into the familiar setting with quiet confidence. The venue was different, but the energy was the same, a mix of nostalgia, polite small talk, and subtle comparisons of life's milestones. This time, however, Hannah wasn't an outsider looking in. Former classmates approached her with genuine admiration, eager to hear about her journey. Gone were the condescending smiles and dismissive comments. In their place were wide-eyed expressions of respect and curiosity. As the evening unfolded, Hannah found herself in conversations filled with laughter, reflections, and moments of sincere connection. She even crossed paths with people who had once overlooked or underestimated her, but there was no trace of bitterness in her heart. Instead, she felt a profound sense of peace. Life had come full circle, not through dramatic confrontations or grand gestures, but through quiet, undeniable growth. As she left the reunion, walking into the cool night air, Hannah realized that the most powerful victories aren't the ones we shout about, they're the ones we carry within us, shaped by every challenge we've faced and every lesson we've learned. The reunion left Hannah with a quiet sense of fulfillment. As she reflected on the evening, she realized how much had changed, not just in her life but in the way people perceived her. Those who once dismissed her as just a waitress now sought her advice on business, leadership, and even personal growth. It wasn't about the admiration, it was about how life had a way of shifting perspectives when least expected. The same faces that once carried condescension now reflected respect, curiosity, and even a touch of awe. It was a testament to how time, experience, and resilience could rewrite narratives people thought were permanent. Liam attended the reunion as well, though with a different energy than in years past. Gone was the overconfident persona he once wore like armor. Instead, he carried himself with humility, quietly acknowledging the past without trying to overshadow it. When he and Hannah crossed paths, the encounter felt natural, devoid of the tension that had defined their earlier interactions. "Funny how things turn out," Liam said with a small smile, his tone light but sincere. Hannah nodded, her eyes reflecting warmth rather than judgment. Life has a way of teaching us what we need to learn, whether we're ready or not. Their exchange was brief but meaningful, a silent acknowledgement of growth, redemption, and the beauty of second chances. Back at home, Hannah sat by her window, watching the city lights flicker against the night sky. She thought about how far she'd come, not just in her career, but in her own self-perception. She no longer measured her worth by external validation or the approval of others. Her journey had taught her that true success wasn't about titles, accolades, or even recognition. It was about living authentically, embracing growth, and having the courage to evolve. The reunion wasn't just a social event, it was a mirror reflecting how far she traveled from the girl who once doubted herself to the woman who now stood tall, not because of what others saw, but because of what she knew to be true within. After the reunion, Liam found himself deep in reflection. Seeing Hannah's growth and the respect she commanded had been both humbling and inspiring. It forced him to confront parts of himself he'd long ignored, his insecurities, his misguided definitions of success, and the ways he'd allowed arrogance to mask his fears of inadequacy. Determined to change, he made a bold decision, to leave his corporate role and start fresh in a new industry. It wasn't about running from his past, but about creating space to rebuild without the shadows of who he used to be. Liam pursued a career in consulting, focusing on leadership development and organizational culture, areas he'd once overlooked but now deeply appreciated. His experiences with Hannah had reshaped his understanding of what it meant to lead. Instead of chasing titles, he prioritized impact. He worked with small businesses, helping leaders cultivate environments rooted in empathy, authenticity, and collaboration. His approach wasn't just theoretical, it was personal. He shared his own journey openly, not shying away from his mistakes but using them as lessons to inspire growth in others. Over time, Liam's new path brought him a sense of fulfillment he'd never found in corporate ladders or boardroom accolades. His work was meaningful, not because it boosted his ego, but because it made a difference. He remained in touch with Hannah occasionally, sending updates on his journey. Their correspondence was marked by mutual respect and quiet encouragement, a reminder that even the most unlikely connections could become catalysts for transformation. For Liam, his greatest achievement wasn't his career pivot, it was the realization that true success isn't about where you end up but how you grow along the way. Hannah's life continued to evolve beyond the walls of her corporate success. She had achieved more than she ever imagined, but with growth came new challenges, both personal and professional. Despite her accomplishments, she found herself reflecting on deeper questions. What truly mattered? What legacy did she want to leave behind? These weren't questions driven by ambition but by a desire for authenticity. She realized that while her career had been fulfilling, there were parts of her life she had neglected: relationships, hobbies, simple joys that often got lost in the pursuit of success. Determined to find balance, Hannah took time away from the corporate world to reconnect with herself. She traveled, not to luxurious destinations, but to quiet places where she could reflect and recharge. She spent more time with her family, rekindling relationships that had been strained by distance and time. She rediscovered her love for painting, a hobby she'd abandoned years ago. With every brushstroke, she felt pieces of herself returning, parts that had been overshadowed by the demands of leadership and the expectations of others. This period of reflection didn't diminish her professional identity, it enriched it. When she eventually returned to her role, she brought with her a renewed sense of purpose. She led with even greater clarity, understanding that success wasn't just about growth charts and revenue reports. It was about the people, the stories, and the impact left behind long after titles faded. Hannah's personal growth journey taught her the most valuable lesson of all, that true fulfillment comes not from what we achieve, but from who we become along the way. Hannah's success had always been intertwined with her family's story. Growing up, her parents had sacrificed so much to give her a chance at a better life. Her father's illness and her mother's resilience had shaped her values, instilling in her a work ethic grounded in humility and gratitude. As her career flourished, she never forgot the foundation her family had provided. But with the demands of her professional life, visits home had become infrequent, phone calls shorter, and meaningful conversations rarer than she liked to admit. Realizing this, Hannah made a conscious effort to reconnect. She took extended time off to visit her mother, now retired and living in the same modest home where Hannah's dreams had first taken root. They spent hours reminiscing, sharing stories from the past, and laughing over simple things: burnt toast, old photo albums, the stray cat Hannah had once begged to keep. These moments reminded her that while achievements could fill resumes, it was relationships that filled hearts. Her mother's pride in her accomplishments was evident, but it wasn't the corporate milestones that mattered most to her. It was Hannah's kindness, resilience, and the woman she had become. Success isn't just about what you've built out there, her mother said one evening, sipping tea on the porch. "It's about what you carry in here," she added, placing a gentle hand over her heart. Those words stayed with Hannah, a reminder that family was the first and most enduring foundation of who she was. No title could ever compare to the simple, profound joy of being loved for who you are, not what you've achieved. Years after her initial rise to success, Hannah found herself standing in front of a small cafe, not as a CEO, but as a woman revisiting the place where her journey had begun. The diner where she had once waited tables had changed ownership, its neon sign slightly faded, but the memories it held were vivid. She stepped inside, greeted by the familiar scent of brewed coffee and the soft hum of casual conversations. It was here she had learned resilience, patience, and the value of hard work, lessons no boardroom could teach. Sitting at a corner booth, she watched a young waitress juggling orders with the same determination Hannah had once carried. There was something familiar in the girl's tired smile, the way she balanced trays with quiet grace despite the rush. After finishing her coffee, Hannah left a generous tip along with a handwritten note, *, "You are more than this job. Keep believing in yourself." *, it wasn't about charity, it was about recognition. She saw herself in that young woman, and she wanted to offer the encouragement she once craved but rarely received. As she walked out into the crisp evening air, Hannah felt a deep sense of peace. Life had come full circle, not in the way she had expected, but in the way that truly mattered. She had built companies, inspired change, and grown in ways she never thought possible. But at the heart of it all, she was still that same determined girl who believed that with hard work, kindness, and a little bit of courage, anything was possible. And in that belief, she had found not just success, but a purpose that would outlast any title or achievement. Hannah's story had become well known within her industry, often highlighted in leadership seminars and business journals. But she never let the accolades define her. For her, the most impactful moments weren't the awards or speaking engagements, it was the small, often unseen acts of kindness that left the deepest imprint. She believed in the ripple effect, that a single gesture, however small, could change the course of someone's life. It was this belief that shaped not just her leadership style, but her approach to life. One afternoon, during a routine business trip, Hannah noticed an overwhelmed employee struggling with a difficult customer at the hotel front desk. Rather than ignoring the situation, she stepped in, offering a calming presence and helping to de-escalate the tension. Afterward, she spoke with the employee, offering words of encouragement and sharing a bit of her own story. That simple conversation, though brief, left a lasting impact. The employee later reached out, sharing how that moment had inspired them to pursue their own goals with renewed confidence. Stories like this became common in Hannah's life, not because she sought them out, but because kindness was woven into the fabric of who she was. She understood that leadership wasn't confined to boardrooms or offices, it was reflected in everyday choices, in how we treat people when no one's watching. In the end, Hannah's legacy wasn't just about the businesses she built or the positions she held. It was about the lives she touched through empathy, authenticity, and the simple yet profound power of kindness. As Hannah approached the later stages of her career, she began to think deeply about the legacy she wanted to leave behind. Wealth and success had their place, but they were fleeting compared to the impact of values, stories, and lessons passed down through generations. She established a foundation focused on mentorship and education, providing resources for young entrepreneurs from underprivileged backgrounds. Her goal wasn't just to offer financial support but to create opportunities for growth, resilience, and self-belief, qualities that had defined her own journey. Hannah often visited schools and community centers, sharing her story not as a tale of triumph over adversity but as proof that success is possible for anyone, regardless of where they start. She spoke candidly about her failures, her doubts, and the moments she had questioned her own worth. It was these vulnerabilities, more than her achievements, that resonated with people. She wanted them to see that behind every title was a person who had stumbled, learned, and grown, not despite those experiences, but because of them. In her final public speech before retiring from corporate life, Hannah stood on a stage filled with young faces full of hope and potential. "Your story is still being written," she said, her voice steady and warm. "Don't let anyone define it for you. Success isn't about the destination, it's about who you become along the way." As the crowd erupted in applause, Hannah smiled, not because of the recognition, but because she knew her legacy was secure, not in wealth, but in the countless hearts she had inspired to believe in themselves. As Hannah transitioned into retirement, life took on a different rhythm. The fast-paced meetings, the back-to-back calls, and the high-stakes decisions were replaced by quiet mornings with coffee, leisurely walks, and time for reflection. But even without the corporate title, her influence lingered. People still reached out for advice, not because of her former position, but because of the wisdom she had shared throughout her journey. She realized that leadership wasn't confined to offices or boardrooms, it was woven into the fabric of everyday life, carried through the lessons we leave behind and the people we inspire. In her quieter days, Hannah began writing a memoir, not to boast about her achievements, but to capture the lessons she'd learned through failures, heartbreaks, victories, and the countless small moments that shaped her. The process was deeply personal, forcing her to confront emotions she had long tucked away. She wrote about the girl who once felt invisible at a high school reunion, the woman who faced public humiliation yet rose above it with grace, and the leader who discovered that success wasn't about titles but the lives we touch. Through her words, she hoped to remind others that every setback holds the seeds of growth if we're brave enough to nurture them. As she finished the final chapter, Hannah felt an unexpected sense of peace. Her life had come full circle, not through grand triumphs, but through resilience, kindness, and the quiet power of believing in herself when no one else did. She understood now that life's greatest lessons often come from the moments we least expect, the small gestures, the silent battles, the relationships that challenge us to grow. She closed her notebook, smiling softly. The story wasn't just hers anymore, it belonged to everyone who had ever felt underestimated, overlooked, or unseen, and who had the courage to rise anyway. Years later, long after her retirement, Hannah received an unexpected letter. It was from Liam. His handwriting was neat, deliberate, and the words carried a sincerity that time had only deepened. In the letter, he shared how his life had continued to evolve, how he'd built a career centered around helping others find their own paths, and how much her influence had shaped his journey. "I used to think success was about power," he wrote, "but you taught me it's about purpose. I'm grateful not just for the lessons you taught me directly, but for the ones I learned by watching how you carried yourself, with grace, strength, and humility." Reading the letter, Hannah felt a warmth that surprised her. Their story had been complicated, marked by moments of humiliation, redemption, and growth, but it was also a testament to the power of change. She wrote back, not with formalities, but with the same honesty that had defined her leadership. "Growth isn't linear," she replied. "It's messy, uncomfortable, and often disguised as failure. But the fact that you kept learning, kept evolving, that's the real success." Their exchange continued over the years, not as CEO and employee, but as two people who had grown through each other's presence, however unlikely it had been. Their correspondence wasn't frequent, but it was meaningful. It served as a quiet reminder that people aren't defined by their worst moments. We're shaped by what we choose to do after them. For Hannah, Liam's growth wasn't just his own victory, it was part of her legacy too. Not because she had set out to change him, but because the ripple effect of living authentically had the power to reach places we never expect. And that, she realized, was perhaps the most beautiful part of her story. In her final years, Hannah often visited the small town where her journey had begun. The streets were familiar yet changed, much like herself. The diner where she had once worked was gone, replaced by a modern cafe, but the memories lingered like faint echoes. She would sit by the window, sipping tea, watching young people pass by, some rushing, others lost in thought, each carrying dreams, fears, and untold stories. She wondered how many of them felt unseen, just as she once had, and hoped they'd find the courage to believe in themselves, even when the world didn't. One day, while sitting in the cafe, a young woman approached her, recognizing her from an old interview that had circulated online. She was nervous but eager, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. "I just wanted to say, your story changed my life. I was ready to give up on my dreams, but then I heard about how you started with nothing and built everything from scratch. It made me realize that maybe I could do it too." Hannah listened, her heart swelling with quiet pride. She reached out, gently placing her hand over the young woman's. "You don't need permission to chase your dreams," she said softly. "You just need to start." As the woman left, Hannah looked out the window, the sun casting a warm glow across the town she'd once longed to escape. She realized that her story wasn't just about rising from humble beginnings or overcoming humiliation. It was about the countless small steps, the invisible battles, and the quiet choices that shaped her into the woman she had become. Life had been messy, beautiful, painful, and extraordinary, not despite its imperfections, but because of them. And as she sat there, in the simplicity of that moment, Hannah understood that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not defined by her past, but at peace with it, knowing that every chapter had led her home.